The taller one over here, that's the NCore 100 Max, and next to it is the new NCore 100 Air from Cooler Master. You don't need to get the bundled power supply and the cooler with this one though. The standalone, stand up, and it's a standout case. Welcome to Machines and More. I showed you a little preview in the last video when we tested with the 9950X 3D. Along with the NR200P Max V3 we saw at CES this year, we saw this one and I was surprised it was already hitting the market so quickly after they showed it there. So I've reviewed the Max before in the past. There are a few differences that I'll cover today in this review. High level, they are very similar, but there are also some key differences. Primary being this is an air cooling only case. So big thanks to Cooler Master for supplying our test unit today. They are not a sponsor for this video and I'm not paid by them to review this case. And as always, you can expect well-tested and objective reviews here on this channel. So let's go ahead and get started. Cooler Master's NCore 100 Air is a vertical sandwich style small form factor case. I have the black version here, and there also is a silver gray with white accents and white feet. The height is for 49 millimeters, including 24 millimeter tall feet, and that's for 25 without, 155 millimeters wide in the out-of-box configuration, and it's 212 millimeters deep. So the way they quote their volume is a little bit more honest at 14.7 liters. A lot of companies don't actually count the feet, but that number is quoted with the feet. Absent the feet, the box part is about 14 liters even. Similar to the Max product, you are mandated to a mini-itx board and an SFX power supply. It does have this wider 3-slot GPU mode, and that's what I have here, and I'll show you how to accomplish that shortly. And in this mode, it is roughly a PCI slot wider at 172 millimeters, making this, in this form factor, 16.4 liters, including the elevation from the feet. So they could have made it a little bit deeper, and that could allow for a front radiator like the Fractal Move, but I kind of like that it's not so deep, and that kind of simplifies the decision-making process for CPU cooling. Unlike the Max, it is a case-only product, although you do get 2 case fans, and you do also receive a Gen 4 riser cable, which is necessary to connect the graphics card to your motherboard. The dimensional difference versus the case from the Max is the height. The Max used a top AIO for cooling, and it is 32 millimeters taller. Here, because they took that away, you can't just mount your own 120 millimeter at the top. Since it's not a Max product, you don't have to get it with a power supply. In fact, you can't get it with the power supply or AIO. The Air designation in the name refers to the singular mode of CPU cooling, which is a top-down air cooler up to 70 millimeters, and that's based on the manual suggestion. A 68 millimeter cooler provide space for an air gap away from the panels, which some would prefer for noise reasons. Another difference from the Max is that you can actually adjust the spacing between the CPU and GPU in 4 increments. That's a little bit clunky because you do have to take off the power plug and the top fan, remove 5 screws, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom, and 1 at the back, and then you can allocate space. In the normal mode, you can get a 63 millimeter thick GPU with a 40 millimeter CPU cooler, or a 2-slot card with a 68 millimeter CPU cooler. And in the expanded mode, you add practically a slot's width to the clearances. And because the expansion happens at the GPU side, the only benefit to expanding the case is for a thicker card, because you can't actually reallocate that space back to the CPU cooler beyond that 68 to 70 millimeter number, depending on how you what air gap you're choosing. One thing to know is that with the side panels and coolers that are approaching the maximum clearance for whatever mode you set it in, you do want to be cautious, because even with a 67 millimeter cooler here and a small air gap, there's a little bit of noise amplification due to turbulence, and I'll show you that shortly. The plastic sheet that's built into the side panel on the CPU cooler side does kind of exacerbate that somewhat, a slight amount. So to the extent that you can, I would try to pick a CPU cooler that gives a little bit more spacing between the side panel. To open the case, it's toolless. It's a little bit unnerving the first time you do it, because you kind of have to pull it off like this, and then you pry it off like that. And this side you pull this way. parallel to the sides. The panels, they're anodized aluminum. They've got a fancy ventilation pattern that's also present on the Macs. And when you're building it up, it's recommended to take out this supporting column, although I won't remove it right now, okay, because I do want to keep it here. The case stays together, and that's toolless. To expand the case to the wider GPU mode, you just need to unscrew this pillar, and you'll shift it to the outer position. And then you'll need a new top hat, this guy here, which they provide you. And then the other thing is the foot at the bottom. It'll need to be shifted to the outer position so that you take up that air gap. And then when that's all done, when you close up the case, you just pop in the panels to the wider position, and that will close up. You actually can't really tell that it was kind of changed that way. The max GPU length in the out-of-the-box configuration is 337 millimeters. For cards that do sit within 63 millimeters of thickness, you can remove the standoffs that prop up the GPU hanger, and you can relocate the entire riser cable and drop the whole assembly downwards 20 millimeters, just like in the Max case. And that'll give you an extra 20 millimeters of card length. One consideration is that because the card is then lower, you will have less room at the bottom for your display cable, so you definitely need a 90-degree cable at that point. If your card is within 337 millimeters of length, then you can go up to 80 millimeters of GPU thickness, provided you set your CPU cooler at the minimum height of 48 millimeters. The case comes with two exhaust fans. They are Cooler Master's own CS120 fans, set up as an exhaust out of the box, and that's how I think you'll want to keep them. So one neat feature on this case panel is the use of a plastic sheet. You see there's two round cutouts here. The top cutout is for the power supply, and the other one is for the CPU cooler, and this is going to force the intake air when it comes through the side panel to come directly at these two components. This guy does help a lot with thermals, so you do have to kind of pick and choose. I don't think it's that much more of an issue with the plastic sheet, but I think that noise consideration is something you should be aware of in the event that you are sensitive to that. But for most users, I think this would still be more of a benefit than a downside. To test this case out, I did a few different builds with a few different GPUs. You might have seen the 9950X 3D testing that I did in this case with that undervolt tutorial running the CPU at 150 watts. It runs actually pretty well. It actually impressed me a lot. The main testing was with a 9900X, which runs at 162 watts full package power. The Thermalright AXP 120 X67 had no issue enabling the 9900X to run at the full power, although it did necessitate full fan speed. Still though, for it to be able to run with this particular CPU is quite impressive. With this cooler, I am required to place the case divider at the max setting number 1, which only gives 42.7 millimeters of space to the GPU in the narrow mode, so that's too restrictive, so I did space it out to the 3-slot mode. This is the Asus B850ITX motherboard. It's an excellent choice for mid to high-end AM5 build, and that does get placed right side up. And we have full connectivity for the side I/O, 2 USB-A, 1 USB-C, front audio, and power button with the Cooler Master logo LED. Over the board, the power supply here is the Cooler Master's VSFX 850 watt unit. That's the ATX 3.0 unit. The PSU attaches to this cage and it secures and hangs up here with one screw. And I did cheat a little bit. I stole the cables off the Max case because the lengths are very ideal. Because of the top placement of the PSU directly over the board, you have this very short CPU EPS cable run and a very short 24-pin ATX cable run. To get the GPU cables over, the power cables, you kind of wrap them around this side and just keep it under the divider here, and that keeps things really neat and tidy. The riser cable goes over through the bottom, and then that attaches to the rear of the case, and that's where you're going to insert the card into that expansion slot there. On the other side of the case, this is Asus's Prime 9070 XT, which is a 2.5 slot card that sits about 1 centimeter away from the panel. You can't give back space to the CPU cooler beyond that 68 millimeter setting, so you're kind of stuck with an air gap here, and that actually has some thermal considerations there. So let's take a look at the CPU thermals first. For a CPU only render here, 9900X did get quite warm, but this setup was enough to keep it from hitting the max temp of 95 degrees. The plastic insert is actually very effective, and testing with an open panel shows that when you use the insert, the closed panel achieves parity with an open panel. And if you remove the plastic, the chip was starting to run at reduced power already. The absolute difference here is closer to 3 degrees. So yeah, keep the plastic sheet in. So first GPU I tested with the Asus Prime 9070 XT, which ran okay, but I did notice it ran much warmer than when I tested it during the card review, which was in an inverted Ncase M2. And it turns out the spread between an open case and a closed panel is pretty big with this card. And studying it a little bit, the shape of the panel may kind of be helping it to recirculate the exhaust. The panel isn't necessarily poorly ventilated, but because we can't shift the card out to take up that space, the rounded corner could very well help direct the exhausted heat back into the fans, and round and round we go. Now, to test this, I did pop in a thicker card, the 4070 Super Tough. That's close to the max spec in this mode, and the thermal gap between the open and closed wasn't quite as pronounced, but I still do get the impression that the panel adds a big penalty to GPU thermals. Finally, on GPU thermals, I did mount up the 6800 XT that I have tested with quite a few cases, and here the temps are good relative to other cases. It's fairly middle of the road. It's similar to Ncase M1 Evo and Fractal Mood in a standard config here. So to sum up thermals, a more sensible choice of CPU for this case would, of course, be something ranging from 90 watts to 140 watts of power draw, say 9700X to 9800X 3D level of power draw. And that is considering that some of your configurations may result in you being stuck with a smaller air cooler than what I was able to give it here, which is the max size. There are quite a lot of cards that are possible to fit within this dimension, but you will have to be careful so as to not leave too much space between the panel and the card. So just to avoid too much recirculation. Quick listen to the fan noise. What you do have to watch out for in cases that intake close to these side panels is turbulence. And so I'll give you a quick examples of what the panels sound like on and off. And this is the fan noise typical in a gaming scenario with the 9070 XT with stock case fans at 850 RPM. 45% PWM. You don't really have that effect here because the card is far enough away, so you don't want to get too close either. There is some turbulence with a cooler that's very close to the max spec here, so I'm just going to take this panel off and show you what that sounds like. All right, that's with the panel close, and then we'll pull it away. Hear that difference? It's almost like it amplifies it a little bit. And I did notice when you take off that plastic sheet, the effect is somewhat less pronounced. Slightly less, but not that much less. Right, there's still a little bit of that effect. And I do have this cooler very close to the side panel, so I think if you can come with a cooler that's just a few more millimeters inset, I think that's would be the sweet spot there. This case is $140 with the riser cable and 2 case fans. Let's just discuss some highlights for your comparison. So pros of the case, like most vertical cases, it's very footprint efficient. Visually, it has intriguing cutouts in the panels, and I like that you can choose a narrower form factor if you have smaller components. Although I think that most builders will gravitate towards the wider mode, given the typical AIB graphics card dimension these days. Side I/O, it's actually quite nice. It's extensive, it's easy to access, and it's relatively discreet since it's not in a really easy to see location on the side here on the foot. Building the case, relatively simple, very easy to open up and start building. It's easy to access things, especially with that toolless support column removed. And thermals, they're good. The GPU compatibility is good, and the card thermals are absolutely fine here, but I do feel like they could be better optimized. The CPU air cooling thermals are very good, given the small coolers that the case is mandated to. The plastic airflow optimizer is something that I wish case designers did more often in the SFF space. And I've experimented with using clear tape in some of my videos, and this is just a more legit way to implement that. For the most part, the material quality is also quite good. They're not, I wouldn't say top-notch materials, but the aluminum panels are very well machined. The anodizing is good, and it's a significantly better quality than what I've seen with similar vertical style case like Meshlicious or Mushroom S, which is a similar layout. Here the case has great GPU compatibility, save for the longest cards that also happen to be very thick. Lastly, on pros, the touch points are good. The way the panels insert, I think it's really neat. There are plenty of cable management points throughout the case, and I do like that this iteration of NCore 100 allows for customizing the divider position. Although, as noted, it is a little bit of a chore to shift, but you kind of do it just once or twice, depending on how often you set the case up, right? Being a vertical case, there are some considerations. You may want to use 90-degree display cables. You may not need them in the normal GPU position, but if you're uncomfortable with putting a sharp bend in your display cables, then I think those will be a quality of life improvement. There's not actually too much I dislike about the case. One area I did feel a little bit constrained was that even if you expand it out to the wider mode, that you can't allocate space back towards the CPU cooler. When kind of looking at it, it seems that you should be able to do that, which really would be nice, because that way builders could take full advantage of that flexibility and go with an even bigger air cooler like, the L12S by 77 if they wanted. And I find that the divider configuration, that it was a little bit finicky to adjust compared to other sandwich style cases, but like I mentioned, that is more of an infrequent interaction with the case for most users. Comparing price to other similar sandwich style cases with a Gen 4 riser cable, Lanley Dan A4H2O is $159 currently, Fractal Mood is $150, Supt Mushroom S with Gen 4 cable is $150, Thermalright TR100 has gone up a little bit since I initially reviewed it, and that's around $130 now. So I say in terms of pricing, the NCore 100 is reasonable, especially considering that you do get 2 case fans. For those comparison cases that I mentioned, only the Fractal Mood comes with a single big case fan, so there is some convenience and value built in. They're not exceptional fans, but at low RPMs, they're absolutely fine. One thing that will make this case even better is a good Gen 5 riser cable, and not many sandwiches currently ship with Gen 5 cables. With Gen 5 GPUs on the market, there's going to be some compatibility headaches with the Gen 4 cables. Interestingly, I didn't actually have any issues booting this up in auto at first with the 9070XT, which is a Gen 5 GPU, but I did set it to Gen 4 on the X16 slot just to avoid any potential issues. Hopefully in a future iteration, we do get a Gen 5 cable. Overall, it is a standout example of vertical SFF. I love the idea. It's a really fun, great footprint here. If you like vertical style, you will be very happy with this case. That'll wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please give a like and make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Links are down below for the case and the components. Thanks for your support, and big thanks for watching today.